The Grand Chamber of the Galactic Security Council had never been this full. Representatives from all 87 member species had crammed themselves into the massive amphitheater, their varied physiologies creating a kaleidoscope of colors, shapes, and space, and occasionally conflicting atmospheric needs. The methane breathers' containment bubbles bobbed nervously near the ceiling. The silicon crystallines clinked against each other in what I knew was their version of anxious whispering. Even the usually stoic hive consensus was emitting distress pheromones strong enough that the air filtration system had kicked into emergency mode. Order. The emergency session of the Galactic Security Council will now commence, announced Grand Arbiter Zool, whose gelatinous form pulsed with the official colors of authority. Zool's voice, transmitted through their translator module, echoed across the chamber. We face an unprecedented crisis that threatens the very stability of our alliance. I leaned back in my specially designed human chair, one of the few concessions to Earth's higher gravity physiology, and sighed. Commander Vex Orion, at your service, human liaison to the Galactic Security Council, and currently the most uncomfortable being in the room. And that's saying something when you're competing with species like the Puddle Collective, who are literally just sentient slime molds. The motion before us today, continued Zool, their translucent body now turning a solemn shade of indigo, is to immediately and permanently remove all human personnel from combat roles within our joint military operations. And there it was. The reason I'd been summoned from my quarters at what humans would consider 3 a.m. The reason every diplomat, military attaché and bureaucrat with more than 2 appendages was packed into this room, buzzing with a mixture of relief and vindication. From my vantage point near the Earth delegation's embarrassingly empty section, most of my colleagues having mysteriously developed diplomatic illnesses once they'd heard about the emergency session, I could see the reactions rippling through the crowd. Admiral Krex, the 8-limbed strategic genius of the Arcturian fleet, was rapidly clicking his mandibles in what I recognized as enthusiastic agreement. Ambassador Trill of the Regelian Confederacy was waving all 4 of her eye stalks in emphatic support. Even my drinking buddy General Phlox, who usually defended humanity's creative problem-solving approaches, was nodding his armored cranial plate. The chair recognizes Fleet Commander Nix Volo of the Proxima Centauri Defense Force, Zool announced. Nix Volo rose from her seat, her feathered crest extending to its full intimidating height. I'd worked with her on 3 joint operations. She respected humans. Or at least she had esteemed colleagues. She began, her translator rendering her bird-like trills into the common tongue. I speak not from prejudice but from direct experience. Just 7 cycles ago, my battle group coordinated with a human special operations team on what should have been a simple containment mission against void pirates in the Cygnus Arm. I winced, knowing exactly which mission she meant. The human contingent. While undoubtedly brave, she continued diplomatically, interpreted our battle plan as, how did their commander phrase it? Ah yes, more of a guideline really. They proceeded to, and I quote, improvise a better solution, which resulted in the complete destruction of the pirate base, significant damage to 2 nearby uninhabited moons, and the creation of a temporary black hole. A collective gasp rippled through the chamber. I sank lower in my chair. It was a very small black hole, I mumbled, though no one was listening. And when questioned, Nix Volo continued, her feathers now quivering with barely contained emotion. The human squad leader seemed genuinely confused by our distress, stating that the mission was accomplished with 0 casualties on our side and that the structural integrity of the solar system was only temporarily compromised. The chamber erupted in a cacophony of translated outrage. Tentacles waved, mandibles clicked, photosynthetic fronds fluttered in agitation. Grand Arbiter Zool's form rippled as they called for order. Commander Orion, they said, gelatinous appendages gesturing toward me. As the human liaison, would you care to respond to these allegations? Suddenly 800 pairs of eyes, optical sensors, chemoceptors, and whatever the quantum entangled used to perceive reality, all focused on me. I stood slowly, straightened my uniform, and cleared my throat. On behalf of the Earth Alliance, I began, trying to channel my inner diplomat. I want to assure the Council that humanity deeply values our partnership with the galactic community. We recognize that there may have been some cultural misunderstandings regarding tactical approaches. A rumble of disbelief rippled through the crowd. Cultural misunderstandings? Erupted Sub-Commander Grix of the Taurian Defense League. Your species treats battle plans like optional reading material. That's not entirely I started. Your combat troops used an antimatter warhead to clear a minefield, shouted someone from the Centaurian delegation. It was very effective, I tried again. A human engineer rewired our sacred quantum harmonizer to, and I quote, boost the signal for their entertainment broadcasts, wailed a representative of the ethereals, their luminous form flickering with distress. I raised my hands in surrender. Okay, look, we may have different approaches to problem solving in high-stress situations, but I assure you, humans are valuable allies who single-handedly caused the diplomatic incident on Proxima Eve by challenging the Supreme Overlord to what they called a friendly drinking contest, interrupted Ambassador Lox, whose species famously lacks both alcohol tolerance and a sense of humor. This was going to be a very long day. Perhaps Grand Arbiter Zool suggested, their gelatinous form now pulsing with what I recognized as diplomatic caution, it would benefit the Council to review specific incidents. Admiral Krex, you oversaw Operation Reasonable Force. Would you share your experience? Admiral Krex rose on his 8 legs, mandibles clicking irritably. I suppressed a groan. Of all the operations they could have chosen, they picked the Reynolds incident. 18 cycles ago, Krex began, we deployed a joint task force to handle a minor border dispute in the Epsilon sector. Standard peacekeeping protocol. The human contingent was led by one Captain Jack Reynolds. Oh no, I muttered. Jack Overkill Reynolds. The man who'd never met a problem he couldn't solve with explosives. Multiple explosives. The mission parameters were explicit, Krex continued, tapping a control panel that projected a holographic battle plan. Establish presence in disputed territory. Show of force only. Minimal engagement if necessary. The hologram shifted to actual mission footage. A standard Galactic Alliance cruiser hovered above a rocky moon. 3 smaller vessels deployed to strategic positions. Captain Reynolds was assigned to secure this outpost. Krex indicated a small structure on the moon's surface. The hostile force consisted of approximately 20 combatants with light weapons. The footage zoomed in on a human dropship approaching the outpost. Captain Reynolds requested permission to, quote, handle this my way. Against my better judgment, I authorized tactical freedom. The footage showed the dropship suddenly veering off course. Reynolds bypassed the landing zone and instead positioned his vessel here. Krex pointed to a crater several kilometers from the objective. When questioned, he said he wanted to, and I quote, make an entrance. The footage continued. What happened next made several council members recoil. Rather than approach with standard protocol, the human led his squad through a series of completely unnecessary aerial maneuvers using personal jetpacks, while simultaneously deploying what they called shock and awe tactics. The hologram showed humans in combat exoskeletons literally raining from the sky, trailing colorful smoke behind them, while loud music was that classical Wagner. It blasted across all communication channels. The enemy combatants were so confused they surrendered immediately, Krex admitted reluctantly. However, the footage shifted to show Reynolds standing triumphantly on the outpost roof, pressing what appeared to be a detonator. Captain Reynolds had, without authorization, planted explosive devices around 3 nearby abandoned mining facilities, claiming they were, and I quote, perfect for ambushes, so better safe than sorry. The hologram displayed 3 simultaneous explosions that were, by any reasonable standard, excessive. The resulting seismic activity destabilized the moon's already precarious orbit. Within 2 days, the moon fractured into 17 large pieces. Gasps echoed through the chamber. When confronted, Krex's mandibles clicked in remembered frustration. Reynolds simply stated that the disputed territory no longer exists, so technically the border dispute is resolved. He then requested commendation for resolving the situation with, and these were his exact words, Zero alliance casualties and minimal paperwork. I closed my eyes briefly as the chamber erupted in outrage. In Captain Reynolds' defense, I said weakly when the noise subsided, the moon was uninhabited, and he did successfully end the conflict. By destroying the territory being disputed, shrieked a representative from the diplomacy corps. Unconventional problem-solving is a human specialty, I offered. The debris field created by the moon's destruction disrupted shipping lanes for 3 standard cycles, Admiral Krex countered, which Reynolds' team voluntarily helped clear, I pointed out, using methods that were. I trailed off, remembering how Reynolds had suggested speeding things up by detonating strategic charges to pulverize the larger chunks. Also somewhat explosive in nature, I admitted. Grand Arbiter Zul's form rippled with what might have been a sigh. And this, they said, was considered a successful mission by human standards. Well, I said carefully, nobody on our side died, the conflict ended, and Captain Reynolds completed the mission report on time. By human military standards, that's practically a miracle. The chamber had barely recovered from Admiral Krex's testimony when Ambassador Lixner of the Harmonious Accord rose from her seat. Her crystalline exoskeleton chimed softly as she moved a sound that usually indicated deep distress among her kind. Perhaps, she began, her melodic voice translator set to its most diplomatic tone, the Council believed the solution was to redirect human energy toward more peaceful endeavors. I winced. I knew exactly where this was going. After the Reynolds incident, Lixner continued, I personally advocated for including humans in diplomatic missions. I believed their unique perspective might be valuable in certain negotiations. She paused, her crystal facets flashing in what I recognized as the equivalent of a pained expression. I recommended human diplomatic specialist Tessa Morgan to join the peace delegation to the Ontari conflict. Several council members visibly recoiled at the name. Even Grand Arbiter Zul's gelatinous form rippled in what appeared to be discomfort. For those unfamiliar, Lixner explained, the Ontari conflict was a century-long dispute between 2 factions over resource rights. Our delegation was tasked with brokering a power-sharing agreement. The holographic display activated again, showing footage of the peace conference. Seated at a massive table were representatives from both Ontari factions, looking tense but civilized, along with various alien mediators. And there, somehow managing to look both professional and slightly bored, was Tessa Morgan. Specialist Morgan was explicitly instructed to observe only. Lixner continued. On the 3rd day of negotiations, when progress stalled over a particularly contentious mining region, she asked if she could, and I quote, just ask a few questions to clarify the situation. I closed my eyes briefly. Tessa just asking questions, Morgan. The woman who once started a bar fight on Proxima Centauri by just asking if the bartender's cranial tendrils were real or cosmetic. What happened next, Lixner said, her chimes becoming more agitated, defied all diplomatic protocol. The footage showed Tessa standing up, walking to the center of the table, and beginning to ask what seemed like innocent questions. So, Supreme Leader, why exactly do you feel entitled to the Northern Quadrant? And High Commander, could you explain why your people believe they have historical claim to resources they've never actually used? Within 20 minutes, Lixner continued. Both faction leaders were shouting at each other, revealing grievances and historical claims never previously disclosed in formal negotiations. The footage showed the room descending into chaos as security personnel moved in. When security attempted to remove Specialist Morgan for her own safety, she somehow convinced them that the faction leaders were just getting to the good part and should be allowed to get it all out in the open. I watched the familiar scene unfold, Tessa somehow looking completely unfazed by the mayhem around her, but casually leaning against a wall as the 2 faction leaders engaged in what humans would call a proper row. The session devolved into what humans apparently term radical honesty, Lixner said, her crystal facets now vibrating with remembered stress. By the end of the day, 3 assassination attempts had been revealed, 2 secret military operations exposed, and 1 faction leader had admitted to having an affair with the other's genetic progenitor. Murmurs of shock rippled through the council chamber. When the dust settled, Lixner concluded, the Ontari conflict had transformed into a planetary revolution. The faction leaders were deposed, and a new government formed based on what specialist Morgan called getting everything out in the open and starting fresh. The conflict was resolved, I pointed out, unable to help myself. To complete governmental collapse, Lixner chimed in distress. The new government has been stable for 6 cycles, I countered, and their application for alliance membership is pending. Which they submitted, Lixner reminded me, with a cover letter thanking the human delegation for, and I quote, teaching us the value of burning it all down and starting over. I couldn't argue with that. Would you call this, Grand Arbiter Zul inquired, their form now pulsing with genuine curiosity, standard human diplomatic procedure? Well, I said carefully, we have a saying on Earth, sometimes you have to break a few eggs to make an omelette. What's an omelette? Someone asked from the back. Not important, I said quickly. The point is, humans tend to value results over process. Tessa got results by inciting a revolution. A peaceful and ultimately successful revolution, I corrected, and technically, she just asked questions. The council chamber had barely recovered from Lixner's testimony when Chief Engineer Drell stepped forward. Unlike most of the mechanoid collective, Drell had opted for a more organic-looking chassis, though the constant whirring of cooling fans gave away their true nature. After these incidents, Drell began, optical sensors focusing on me with uncomfortable intensity. The Joint Military Command decided that perhaps humans would be better suited to research and development roles. Specifically, we assigned them to weapons RD, where their creativity could be channeled productively without direct field consequences. I couldn't help but laugh, earning me glares from across the chamber. Sorry, I said, composing myself. But you really thought putting humans in charge of developing new weapons would lead to fewer problems? Drell's optical sensors dimmed slightly in what I recognized as the mechanoid equivalent of embarrassment. We assigned oversight. They defended. Strict protocols were implemented. All projects required multiple approval layers before advancing beyond simulation stages. And let me guess, I said, you put Dr. Marcus Hendricks in charge? Dr. Hendricks came highly recommended for his innovative approach to theoretical weapons systems, Drell replied stiffly. Marcus is just a prototype Hendricks, I clarified for the benefit of the council. The man who once built a coffee machine that achieved brief sentience before demanding citizenship rights. The holographic display activated again, showing a state-of-the-art laboratory filled with various alien scientists, and in the center, a wild-haired human gesturing enthusiastically at a whiteboard covered in equations. Dr. Hendricks was tasked with developing theoretical improvements to our standard pulse cannon technology, Drell explained. His mandate explicitly forbade physical prototyping without committee approval. The footage advanced, showing Hendricks working late, alone in the lab, clearly ignoring this directive. 3 weeks into the project, Dr. Hendricks submitted a request to test what he called a minor modification to the targeting system. The request was denied as the modification involved, and I quote, a small adjustment to how the weapon interacts with the fabric of space-time. Several council members shifted uncomfortably in their seats. 2 days later, Drell continued, fans whirring faster with agitation. Laboratory sensors detected an unauthorized energy spike. Security footage reveals that Dr. Hendricks had proceeded with testing anyway, claiming in his personal log that he was just checking the math, and that sometimes you need to see if something works before bothering everyone with paperwork. The footage showed Hendricks connecting a standard pulse cannon to what appeared to be a homemade apparatus cobbled together from spare parts and what looked suspiciously like a modified food synthesizer. The resulting discharge did not damage the weapon or the laboratory, Drell admitted. However, it did create what Dr. Hendricks later described as a tiny, very localized disturbance in the quantum probability field. Define tiny, someone called from the council. The anomaly initially measured 3 centimeters in diameter, Drell replied. However, it began expanding at an exponential rate. Within hours, it had consumed the entire laboratory. By the following day, it had enveloped the research facility. The footage showed evacuation procedures, scientists fleeing, and Hendricks being forcibly removed while protesting that he could fix it if they'd just give him 5 minutes with a spanner and some duct tape. The anomaly eventually stabilized at a diameter of approximately 3 kilometers, Drell continued. Within this zone, the laws of physics became inconsistent. Objects changed mass randomly. Time flowed at variable rates. Probability itself seemed to fluctuate, leading to statistically impossible events occurring with alarming frequency, such as prompted Grand Arbiter Zool. A maintenance drone reported witnessing a potted plant evolve sentience, develop interstellar travel capability, and depart to see the universe all within what it perceived as 7 minutes. I cleared my throat. To be fair, Dr. Hendricks did eventually develop a containment solution. After 3 weeks, Drell's optical sensors flashed in what I recognized as exasperation, during which time 17 different containment specialists from 12 species worked around the clock, while Hendricks insisted his tweaked design would actually make a simple, fantastic defensive system if we could just control it a bit better. The room fell silent for a moment. When questioned about the ethical implications of weaponizing unstable spacetime, Drell concluded, "See." Dr. Hendricks reportedly asked if that was a yes to additional research funding. As chief engineer Drell retreated to their seat, the council chamber erupted into a cacophony of voices, clicks, whistles, and whatever the gaseous consciousness uses for communication, something like harmonic flatulence, if I'm being honest. Grand Arbiter Zool pulsed rapidly, their gelatinous fawn flashing warning colors. Order. We will maintain order. The noise gradually subsided, though the tension remained palpable. I could feel hundreds of alien eyes, optical sensors, and sensory appendages fixed on me, the lone human defender. It seems, Zool continued, that we have established a pattern of, let's call it unconventional problem solving from our human allies. With all due respect, I interjected, these are isolated incidents. For every Reynolds or Hendricks, we have dozens of humans serving admirably throughout the Alliance. Really? Ambassador Florix of the Hive Consensus buzzed skeptically. Because our records indicate 17 major incidents involving human personnel in the last cycle alone. Define major, I challenged. Events resulting in more than 10 million credits in damages, significant policy changes, or fundamental alterations to physical reality, Florix replied smoothly. I winced. That seems like an arbitrary threshold. The hegemony would like to share our experience, rumbled a massive representative from the silicon-based hegemony collective. Their crystalline structure refracted light as they stood, creating a dazzling display that momentarily blinded several smaller delegates. Last cycle, the hegemony representative continued, we integrated human squad leader Devin Cooper into our orbital defense network. When a routine meteor shower approached, Cooper suggested we use it as a live fire exercise to keep the gunners sharp. That sounds reasonable, I offered. Cooper instructed our gunners to, and I quote, make it a competition with prizes for the most creative shots. The result was 3 gunners attempting to carve their names into the larger asteroids. One attempting to create what humans call a trick shot by ricocheting plasma blasts off multiple targets, and one who tried to spell out an obscene human phrase visible from the planet's surface. Several council members gasped. The defense system suffered 3 overloads. 2 targeting computers developed what your technicians called performance anxiety, and 1 gunner is now considering a career in what Cooper called cosmic art. I suppressed a smile. That actually sounded like Devin. The diplomatic corps has logged 47 formal complaints about human cultural integration practices, added a representative from the educational exchange. Particularly troubling is the human habit of teaching alien children what they call practical jokes. And let's not forget, chimed in Medical Director Voon, the incident where Human Medical Officer Patel convinced 3 different species that appendicitis was contagious during an intergalactic conference, resulting in a 3-day quarantine and 17 unnecessary surgical procedures. That was a misunderstanding, I protested. Dr. Patel's translator malfunctioned. For 3 days? Voon countered. I had no response for that. What puzzles us most, Grand Arbiter Zool interjected, their form now a thoughtful shade of blue, is that humans seem to regard these incidents as normal. Commander Orion, when presented with these cases, you appear unsurprised. I sighed deeply. That's because none of this is unusual by human standards. What you're calling major incidents, we call Tuesday. The chamber fell silent. In fact, I continued, suddenly feeling a strange urge to defend my species' lunacy. Most of these stories would barely register as unusual in human military history. We once had a soldier who captured 42 enemy soldiers using just a wooden club and a bad attitude. Another time, we accidentally won a battle because someone read the map upside down and attacked from an impossible direction. You're not helping your case, muttered an aide beside me. The point is, I pressed on, humans are adaptable. We improvise. We find unconventional solutions by creating quantum anomalies. Someone called out. If necessary, I replied with more confidence than I felt. Grand Arbiter Zool's form pulsed slowly. I believe we have heard sufficient testimony. The Council will now deliberate the motion to permanently restrict humans from combat roles within the Alliance. I slumped back in my chair. This was not going well. After what felt like hours of deliberation, but was actually only 42 minutes according to my chronometer, Grand Arbiter Zool's form shifted to the formal decision-making shade of deep purple. The Council has reached a unanimous decision, Zool announced, their translator amplifying the gravity of the moment. A vote of 87-0, the motion passes. All human personnel are hereby immediately reassigned from combat roles within Alliance forces. I closed my eyes, feeling the weight of disappointment. Earth had fought hard for equal standing in the Alliance military. This would not go over well back home. Effective immediately, Zool continued, humans will be restricted to non-combat support roles. Logistics, medical services, maintenance, strategic planning, and cultural exchange programs. I stood, ready to deliver my formal protest. On behalf of the Earth Alliance, I must express our profound disappointment. Humans have a proud military tradition spanning thousands of years. We've fought in every environment from deep ocean trenches to orbital platforms. This restriction is... Commander Orion interrupted an incoming transmission. The holographic display flickered to life, showing the face of General Martinez, Earth's highest-ranking officer in the Alliance. Stand down. I blinked in confusion. Sir, they're removing us from combat operations. This is... The best news I've heard all year, Martinez finished, breaking into a broad grin. Do you have any idea how much paperwork combat operations generate? The insurance claims alone are killing me. In May. Mouthful. The council chamber fell silent as every alien delegate stared at the holographic display in obvious confusion. Sir? I managed, equally confused. Vex, we've been trying to get out of frontline combat roles for years. Martinez explained, looking positively gleeful. Do you know what our casualty rates are compared to other species? We're squishy bags of mostly water going up against silicon-based lifeforms and literal living metal. But our proud military tradition is mostly about looking tough while finding clever ways to stay alive, Martinez countered. Besides, they're putting us in logistics and strategic planning. Do you know what that means? I had a sinking feeling I did. It means, Martinez continued, we get to control the supply chains, transportation networks, and resource allocation for the entire Alliance military. We get to decide who gets what, when, and how. We're in charge of the food, the ammunition, the spare parts, and the leave schedules. Several council members shifted uncomfortably as the implications sank in. Now, instead of a few humans causing chaos on the front lines, Martinez said with a predatory smile, we'll have humans determining how the entire Alliance military functions behind the scenes. This is perfect. Grand Arbiter Zool's form had shifted to a disturbed shade of yellow. General Martinez, they said carefully, perhaps we should reconsider. Too late. Martinez interrupted cheerfully. You voted. It's on record. No take-backs. We accept your decision with humility and grace, and will begin our reassignment immediately. Martinez out. The hologram disappeared, leaving the chamber in stunned silence. 3 months later, I stood in my new office overlooking the massive Alliance logistics hub on Proxima Station. Below me, hundreds of humans scurried about, reorganizing supply chains, optimizing resource allocation, and completely revamping the military's procurement procedures. My communicator chimed. Commander Orion, came Grand Arbiter Zul's voice, sounding distinctly stressed. We need to discuss the new, what are they calling it, just-in-time combat supply system? Ah yes, I replied, watching as a human supply officer below argued with a Taurian quartermaster over the definition of essential equipment. One of our efficiency experts thought it would streamline operations. It has resulted in 3 battle groups receiving meditation crystals instead of power cells, Zul said flatly. Clerical error, I assured them. We're also rolling out our new dynamic reassignment protocol, which allows any human logistics officer to temporarily requisition any Alliance asset for emergency repurposing. A long silence followed. The Council is reconsidering its position on human combat roles, Zul finally admitted. Perhaps we were hasty. I smiled as I watched a human engineer below explaining to a group of confused alien technicians why the new maintenance schedule involved something called percussive maintenance. I'll be sure to pass that along, Arbiter, I replied. But I should warn you we're really starting to enjoy ourselves in these support roles. Zul's sigh translated across all known frequencies. That's precisely what we're afraid of. Afyin.